once again, guys, to the Path to Eternity. As you remember, I was planning on making you guys watch a movie today so that I could do parish council, but you make plans and God laughs. So we're just going to be moving on with what our lesson is. Remember, chapter 1 was the foundation of the Orthodox faith. We just did a 40,000-foot overview of just what we believe as Orthodox Christians, so you can get familiar a little bit with some of the concepts. And now we're going deeper and deeper into the specific concepts. Last time we went into the doctrine of the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. God is three persons in one essence. It is a mystery beyond our ordinary comprehension, beyond our ordinary experience. Nevertheless, this is the key to understanding and unlocking all of reality. The world was created by the Trinity. Human beings are in the image of the Trinity, and that means that human flourishing, the ideal of human life, the way human beings are meant to live their life, is in imitation of the Trinity. That is a unity of love. Which is where there is complete unity, but it's unity in diversity. The Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit all love each other and are all completely joined to one another, but at the same time, the Father does not cease to be the Father, the Son does not cease to be the Son, the Spirit does not cease to be the Spirit. It's not like certain, Indian conceptions of heaven where you're a drop of water and Brahman is the ocean, and then you just drop and you dissolve and disappear and lose your identity. Our purpose as Christians is to be united with God, but it's not to lose what we are, because God himself doesn't lose who he is, even within his own being. So we talked about the Trinity last time, God that is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This week we're going to be talking about creation, because one of the things we understand about who God is and what God does and has done is God is our creator. The world comes from him. Remember, we talked last time about how all of reality has the marks of the Trinity on it because it was created by the Trinity. Just like if you get really familiar with a piece with an artist, like I can always tell what song is a Johnny Cash song, even if I never heard it before, because it's imprinted sort of with his essence. And if you get familiar with Mozart, someone can pick out Mozart from 100 different classical pieces. Likewise, the world that we live in has the stamp of the Holy Trinity on it, and that's why we said human. That's the reason why human beings are the way they are. They're made for love. They're made for relationship. They're not mere sort of Darwinistic survival machines. Likewise, all of the world evinces this property of unity in diversity. The world is one and unified, and at the same time, it is a dizzying amount of multiplicity and diversity within it. These are some of the stamps of the Trinity. So now we're going to talk about we're going to pivot. Like Matthew said, we're going to pivot from looking at the heavens. Now we're going to look a little more at the earth. We're going to talk about the creation of the world. So remember, we're reading from The Faith by Clark Carlton. Again, none of you have to get that book, but it's what we're basing it off of if you're curious. So the short summary of this chapter is that man was created in the image of God in order to live in a perfect communion of love with God, with his fellow men, and with the physical world. Again, we've already said this multiple times in multiple classes, but now we're going to dig a bit deeper into we've looked more at the God side of things. We're going to talk more about the man side of things. So, the first book of the Bible, remember, everything we know about God comes from what? Comes from revelation, not rational deduction. You can make rational deduction based on revelation, but revelation has to come first. We can only know things about God that he has revealed. Why? Because we can't do science experiments on God. We can't pull him down from the heavens and examine him. He has to tell us what has happened. So we learn about creation first, not exclusively. Genesis is not the only book of the Bible that talks about creation and tells us important things about creation, but Genesis is the primary account of creation. And Genesis is primarily concerned with the meaning of the world's existence. Specifically, so we're talking about Genesis chapters 1 through 3, let's say, tell us about the origin of the world and the origin of mankind. And and some people like to say that Genesis is not a scientific textbook. That is true. It is not a scientific textbook in the modern sense of the world. But it's also, we don't want to allegorize it too hard and say then it has nothing meaningful to tell us. Genesis tells us the true history of the world. Genesis tells us about where we come from. Genesis tells us about where the world comes from. However, it doesn't do it in in the detail of telling us, the origin of the elements or how the atomic nuclei fused or whatever, this and that. But Genesis is primarily concerned with the meaning of the world's existence, specifically that God created the world out of nothing, and that man has a unique place in the world as God's image bearer. God created the world out of nothing. Out of nothing. Ex nihilo is the Latin phrase. Ekton uk ondon in Greek, I believe. That is an incredibly significant statement. Why? What does it tell us? It tells us first and foremost that the world is not self-existent and eternal. This is in contrast to a lot of ancient philosophies and a lot of modern philosophies about the world. So, in a lot of ancient views of the world, you had this sense that the world was just kind of there. And God came from wherever God came from, if he came from anywhere at all, or the gods, and that he shaped that world that was already there. The raw material just existed. It was just out there floating in space, and God shaped it. In which case, God would be called the creator, the shaper of the world, or the former of the world. I think the Gnostics would use the term demiurge, but God is not the creator. Why? Because matter existed on its own. And to say that matter exists on its own independently is to make matter a sort of God, is to endow it with godlike properties. If it is eternal and self-existent and will never go away, it becomes godlike. That's at the core of modern atheism, or what we better termed maybe scientific materialism, is the belief that matter kind of exists on its own and can sort of generate itself. A universe can sort of generate itself. Now, of course, obviously there are a whole bunch of problems with that idea, and it's not true. But that's the outlook that they're coming from, is that the universe can sort of create itself and self-organize. And Genesis tells us, no, it's the opposite. The universe did not create itself, and if it can self-organize, it can only self-organize because God endowed it with certain creative properties. Matter is dependent on God. And this is at the heart of warnings against idolatry. Because the issue with idolatry, as it was always seen among the church fathers, was that you are worshiping the creation instead of the creator. You are worshiping something which comes and goes, which is not eternal and self-existent. So, a lot of ancient peoples worship the sun, for example. Why? Well, the sun is a symbol of God. God put it in the sky so that we could think of him. But once you think that ball of gas is ruling over you, then you've gone wrong. Once you think it has a will and powers and is guiding your destiny, you've gone wrong. You've believed a lie. And because the sun, now we actually do know from modern physics, was really interesting. To an ancient pagan person, as far as you know, the sun has always been there and always will be there. It might as well be a god. But now we know from modern physics that's actually not the truth. The sun began to exist at some point in the past, and it's going to burn itself out one day. It is not eternal and self-existent. It is not a good candidate for a god. In fact, nothing material is. And that's why it's important to understand that matter is not eternal and self-existent. Matter, it does not have these godlike properties. Matter is good. Matter is a means of communion. The sun is a means of communion with God. The sun is a good thing. We're not against the sun. It gives us life. It gives us food to eat through the plants and so on and so forth. And it is a symbol of God. But you've gone wrong once you think that that is the end in itself. You're supposed to look at the sun and think about God and learn about the Trinity and so on, because the sun is like the Father, the rays of light are like the Son of God, Jesus, and the heat, the energy that we receive from it is like the Holy Spirit. So that's what the Fathers have always said, that the Son is an image of the Trinity. And God structured the world so that we could know about God through the world. And it's not an accident that ancient peoples looked at the sun and said, hey, that must have something to do with the creator of the universe. That must have something to do with what's going on here. There's meaning. The entire world is suffused with meaning. And I think that the real problem we have, now you can go overboard. You can see, you can become like a paranoid schizophrenic and see all kinds of codes and everything, and that it becomes a little ridiculous. But the atheists have gone wrong when they said that the world is meaningless, the world is purposeless. The world actually is completely pregnant, completely saturated with divine truths hidden underneath the material things we see. So God created the world out of nothing. The world is not self-existent and eternal, and thus it cannot be worshipped. That's why In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the first line of Genesis. That has always been understood. Even though some people have taken the later lines to maybe imply that the world was always there first, and the world was out without form and void. It's actually historically always been understood that first line, God created the heavens and the earth, meant before that sentence there was just nothing, zilch, zero. Um, but it was a step-like process. Then it was darkness over the face of the deep. And so when he created all the raw material in one go, but then he formed it and developed it. So the world is not eternal, self-existent, eternal, and thus it cannot um, be worshipped. And that also means that everything within the world is not self-existent and eternal, and is not meant to be worshipped. And that's important to know. Why? Because human beings are not self-existent and eternal. We are dependent. We come from somewhere, and we will dissolve back into the ground. We are not gods. And that kind of seems self-evident to modern Americans. We because we grow up in this intellectual culture that's like halfway between Christianity and atheism, and neither of these tell us that human beings are gods. But it's very common among many cultures to believe that human beings, or some human beings at least, are actually gods. Um, so, for instance, there was a whole problem I was reading. Um, when the Russian Orthodox Church in Manchuria, this is near World War II, so this is the part of China that's north of Korea. The Japanese really wanted. The Japanese who were occupying that place at that point in time had Russian emigres, and they really wanted everyone to acknowledge the emperor as a god. And the Orthodox there had a big problem with that. This goes all the way back, though. This goes back to the Imperial Roman times, when again, so my patron saint, Saint Theodore, was martyred because why? He wouldn't offer incense to the emperor. Saint George, same thing. All of the Roman that's why we have a ton of um, soldier saints like Saint George, Saint Demetrius, Saint Theodore, who were martyred, who were killed, because as their oath as soldiers was they had to offer incense, they had to worship the emperor as a god. You could worship Jesus too if you wanted. You just have to make sure you worship the emperor as a god. Christians would not cross that line because it's not true. It's a lie. A human being is not a god. But this is actually at the heart of Jainism, or Jainism, I don't know how you pronounce it, and certain forms of Hinduism, is to realize that you are God yourself. You are a mode of being of Brahman, of the great God. And of course, we do not. That's not true. And it's sort of from our perspective, it's like a delusional thing. But so anyway, it's important to always know the fundamentals. So the book of Genesis teaches us that human beings are not self-existent and eternal. And you might say, well, duh. But actually, it matters. There are other philosophies that are teaching that human beings actually are gods. Actually, Mormonism teaches that too. By the way, if you didn't know that, that's not me slandering Mormons. They do believe we are all what God the Father is and are destined to one day become what He is. So we always have to return to the basics, and the book of Genesis tells us the basics. And this is important to know because we must know what we are and where we stand in order to develop spiritually. I've always liked the definition of religion. Like, what is a religion? What is a religion? When I got into like the scholarly study of religion, you realize that is a more difficult question to answer, because is a religion about a god? Well, kind of, maybe, but there's some religions that don't have gods. Is religion about an afterlife? Um, Kind of, maybe, but some religions don't have afterlives. What is it that makes a religion a religion? And the best answer I've ever read comes from a scholar of religion named Stephen Prothero, who says that religion is a solution to a problem. Religion is a solution to a problem. So a religion is a view of the world which diagnoses every human being in the entire world looks around at the world and says, something is not right here. There's a way things should be, and this is not it. And the whole thing that a religion is, it's an attempt to diagnose what the problem is and how do you solve it. What the problem is and how do you solve it. So when I'm here to teach you my religion, when I'm here to teach you orthodoxy, I'm presenting you a particular view of the world. This is when I tell you about orthodoxy, I'm telling you what I think the problem is and how to solve it. And notice that when it's phrased this way, it's kind of impossible to avoid having a religion of some kind. Not everyone's going to believe in a God, not everyone's going to believe in an afterlife, but everyone has a particular view of the world that diagnoses what's going on in the world. And a lot of people have just traded, theistic religions for non-theistic religions. But the way that many, many, many people relate to their own political views in this modern day is as a religion, and you can see it. It's they're diagnosing a problem of the world, and they're trying to find a path to salvation out of that problem. So again, you can't really avoid having a religion of some kind or another. You can't really avoid worshiping something or another. I'm just telling you here what the right thing is to worship, and what the actual problem is. So anyway, and that's why it doesn't make sense to mix sort of religious practices. So, for instance, for a Buddhist, the problem of the world is suffering. And the solution is what? It's nirvana, which is Sanskrit for extinguishment. It's the extinguishment of desire. A Christian does not see it that way. We are not trying to extinguish all desire, and we are not trying to extinguish all suffering. Our problem is, I would say, the Orthodox problem is death, and the solution is the resurrection. That is really at the heart. To a lesser degree, the problem is sin, and the solution is forgiveness. So we're not trying to avoid suffering the way the Buddhist is. We're not trying to escape an infinite cycle of birth and rebirth. So that's why if you are a Christian and you believe the problem is death and the solution of resurrection, it really doesn't make sense to adopt Buddhist spiritual practices. Why? Because the Buddhist is trying to do something else. The Buddhist is trying to escape the cycle of birth and rebirth. If there's no cycle of birth and rebirth, then don't practice Buddhism. If there is, then it's smart to practice Buddhism. So I'm not knocking Buddhism. I'm just saying it's like when you try to mix and match to apply like Taoist spiritual practice here, Buddhist, Islamic, mix it all. It just doesn't make sense because they're working to different solutions for different problems. You have to accurately diagnose the problem, and then you can come to a solution. And so Genesis 1-3 really diagnoses the state of the world, I think, extremely well. I think it tells us the truth about how everything is. So we must know what we are and where we stand in order to develop spiritually. And what Genesis tells us on the one hand is that man is not self-existent and eternal, and therefore cannot be worshipped. And then on the other hand, so almost to a certain degree in contradiction from everything what I just said about mankind, is that man is in the image and likeness of God. Man was made in the image and likeness of God. So on the one hand, we're a zero. We're nothing. We're completely dependent in our existence. And on the other hand, we're the crown of creation. We are above everything else. Actually, did you know that according to the Bible, we're actually above the angels as well? Because we mix physical and non-physical nature, physical and spiritual nature. Angels are just spiritual. Animals are just physical. Human beings are the crown of creation because we're the joining of everything. Yes?
Well, that was kind of like part of the problem with the war in heaven, right? Was that Lucifer and a third of the angels did not want to be considered below humans?
Yeah. So that's part of the story. Is that, and that actually it figures much more prominently in the actually Islamic telling of the story. But it's true. It's Lucifer was the greatest of the angels. But that didn't mean he was the greatest of all creation. He was jealous that human beings would be above him. And that's why his whole thing is he tries to destroy human beings. He can't destroy God because how could you? But he can drag human beings to hell because he hates them and he's jealous of them. So yes, exactly. Human beings are above angels. Now, in our fallen state, we're actually a little below the angels, according to St. Paul. But when we reach our destiny, we'll be above the angels, and that's why St. Paul also says, on the one hand, St. Paul says man is a little lower than the angels. On the other hand, St. Paul says, "Did you not know we will judge angels? We will judge angels."
The Psalm says that.
Yeah, and Paul quotes it. Yeah,
bit less than the angels.
Yeah, exactly. So Genesis tells us, again, it's not necessarily a scientific textbook, although we are going to get a little bit into creation evolution in this class. We'll talk a little bit about how we should navigate that. But it does tell us the truth of the world. Genesis tells us how things are. It tells us the meaning of the world. And it's, on the one hand, man is a zero. Man is a nothing. You couldn't have asked to be born. Like, did you ever think about that? Sometimes I think about that and it really freaks me out. If God did not, I could have just been in oblivion, non-existence for eternity. I wouldn't know. But God chose to bring me into existence, and I had no say in the matter at all. And it's a gift. It is a gift. Everything you've ever experienced is a gift, because you had no say in the matter. So on the one hand, you're a zero. On the other hand, you have like the highest destiny of anything in the entire universe. So it's really it's a contrast. It's a paradox. So we are in God's image. What does it mean to be in the image of God, by the way? Does anyone want to take some shots at that?
Free will.
Free will is one dimension of our being made in the image of God. And it is really important in the Orthodox understanding of things, and I think really critical to the reality of it, is that we can choose good versus evil. Again, if that were not the case, if God didn't give humans the genuine ability to choose and experience the consequence of their choices, then the entire universe would be just like one giant sock puppet theater where God plays all the roles because he decided how everyone's going to act. It had to be that way. So we are endowed with perfect free will, and the angels are as well. The angels are as well. So that's not the entirety of the image of God, because the angels are not in the image of God. The angels have free will, and but it's part of it. And I once had a really great professor in my undergrad, and she was the wife of a priest, and she was a really profound woman. And there's this paradoxical question that people sometimes get: could God lift a stone so big he couldn't lift it? And could God create a stone so big he couldn't lift it? And that's supposed to show a contradiction between God's omnipotence. If he could, then that means there's something he can't lift. If he couldn't, that means there's something he can't do. But she said, yeah. Her answer to that question was very profound. She said, yes, and he did. The free will of man. The free will of yes, God did create a stone so big, heavy, he won't lift it, and it's the free will of man. That means we are almost, I don't want to say perfectly, but we are extremely godlike in that respect. We can completely choose to go. I could literally just get in my car. I have the ability within myself to get in my car right now, just drive all the way to Las Vegas and blow all my money if I so choose. I'm not going to do that probably, but I have that potentiality, that power within myself because I have that perfect freedom. Now, our freedom is influenced by things, of course. Our freedom is influenced by our circumstances. Our freedom is influenced by our knowledge, what seems good to us versus what doesn't seem good to us. So to say we have perfect free will isn't to say that no external factors ever influence our decision. It just means at bottom, we do have total freedom of choice. So free will is one of the aspects of the image of God. It's not the only aspect. What are some other ones that you guys can think of?
I would say that being created in the image of God means that we are endowed with those same properties as God, but in a lesser form.
Right, but I'm asking which those properties.
Right. Loving. The ability to love.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mhm.
personality.
Hi, guys.
Personality,
Yeah.
emotion of love and hate, and all things associated. The contrast with, remember Dr. Spock?
Mm-hmm.
He never had any emotions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Human beings have that capacity and always have.
Yeah.
And so does God, because when people talk about God, he gets angry and
So our personhood, yes, is what makes us. The thing about emotions is animals also have emotions. They don't have them at the same depth we do. But just like the angels also have free will, animals also have emotions. So these things, part of what constitutes us in the image of God. There's actually so the long story short, it's a bit of a trick question because the fathers have a bunch of different answers to that question. One of them is free will. Another's personal. The important one is that makes us in the image of God is that we have moral agency. We can choose to do right and wrong, and we can know that it's right or wrong. A dog really can't know what's right or wrong. The dog is going to follow whatever sort of scripts are built into it. It is not in rational control of itself. Yes.
I have a question. So, when it comes to free will, what happens when somebody is severely mentally disabled,
Right.
where they're dependent on others and don't really have free will? You know what I mean?
Right, and this falls in the category of it really depends on who, like, sort of what disease you're talking about. So if you're talking about like a really heavily schizophrenic person, they do have perfect free will, but their conception of reality is so warped that the choices they make are not going to make any sense to anyone. So first of all, what all the elders and fathers tell us is that someone who's severely mentally ill is not going to be judged. In fact, if they're so far gone, that's actually a mercy to God will show them tremendous mercy, because how can they be accountable for their actions if they were just so detached from reality? Of course, it comes through tremendous suffering. But in terms of like you're dependent on people like caregivers or something like that, that's also a situation where you're only going to be accountable for the things you could control.
Yeah.
If you're dependent on people, or if you're a slave or something, or if you're a prisoner, and things happen to you that you just have no control over, you're not going to be accountable for everything, just what you could control. And the thing is, God's judgments are extremely mysterious, and so we really just don't know. We can't look inside a person's soul. We can't take a God's eye view of things. So that's why we can never assign anybody to heaven or hell. We just have to say, Lord have mercy.
What about physically made in the image of God? Like, are we physically made in the image of? Cause what is the term? Like, because Christ was
Yeah.
incarnate
Yeah.
for all of time.
No, he wasn't
Wow.
incarnate for all of time. There's definitely a time when God was not incarnate. He's called the Asarkos Logos, the fleshless Word. So God began to be incarnate at a concrete point in the past.
Okay.
But it does raise a point. Why are humans made the way we are with our 5 fingers? And is this some heavenly archetype? And I think maybe. Yeah, I think maybe. But I don't know. So we have rational souls is one of the big ones. The capacity for abstract thought is what that means. How you can sort of imagine things, plan things, think in terms of language. I was reading a really interesting scientific book recently that about how no animal, at least none living in the present that's ever been tested, comes anywhere close to having language, to having abstract thought, to having planning for the future. So all the stuff you've read about Coco the gorilla is grossly exaggerated. She would mostly sign strings of nonsense, and then people would interpret it as the capacity for language. Because remember, God created through His Word. Language is the unique capacity of human beings. And of course, angels probably have language in some respect or another. But think about trying to have a thought without language. It's very it's not even clear that it would be possible. An inherent part of human beings is language, and that separates us from all non-human animals. And God has language as well. Another thing is we are persons who can love. One of you said that the capacity to love. Your dog can love you. But really not in the way that you can love your spouse. It's not the same. Not in the way you can love your children. There's a depth that's missing there. Sorry, Father Sam. Another really important one that for me is incredibly striking is that we were created for dominion over creation, and we have dominion over creation. Have you looked out at the world? Human beings rule the world as little gods. Again, not mere shaven apes. If it turns out that we were descended in some respect from apes, fine. But what I'm saying is we are not mere apes among apes. We have definitely advanced way beyond anything a chimpanzee is capable of. Or, yes?
But if you're going to follow that line of thinking, the process has to continue. So if we're descendants of apes, and this was 100 million years ago,
Yeah.
or whatever it was, what's above us now?
Yeah, in theory, there might be something
There has to be.
even more advanced.
If the process continues, then something greater than man must exist.
Well, I think the really hardcore Darwinists would say that evolution is not linear in any way, and that we could. It doesn't mean we'll keep ascending. Maybe we'll start descending or something.
Well, the whole thing is built on ascension.
Yeah, I think older
amoeba,
conceptions.
you
I think older
yeah.
conceptions, but I think the
Oh,
the
okay.
hardcore atheist types would deny that. They would say
Okay.
it's just purely random. But we have dominion over creation. I remember because I took an environmental theology class in college. It was kind of stupid. But one of the one of the things it was environmentalists really challenged. They say, oh, the worst things that have happened to the environment are because of the idea of God gave man dominion over nature, and if Christians hadn't believed that, then we wouldn't dominate nature the way we do. Now, it is bad the way we've dominated nature. It is bad what we've done to the air and the water and stuff. I'm definitely an environmentalist in that respect, but I think these people are mistaken. Dominion is reality. Human beings have ruled nature because that's just what we are, and that's what we do. And so you can say, oh, it's so bad that the book of Genesis writes that. Well, it is how things are. Human beings are going to end up being like that. You can shake your fist and be angry all you want, but this is one of the things I try to communicate. What the Bible teaches us is how things are. You can argue against it all you want, but it just is. So that's another way we're in the image of God. So we're rational souls with capacity for abstract thought and language. We're capable of loving. We have free will and moral agency, and we have dominion over creation. These are 4 of the dimensions that we know that we are in the image of God. There's probably more to it than that. It might be something to do physically with how God wanted to make us. Yes, Anastasia?
I was thinking also human creativity.
Yeah.
To express ourselves
Yeah.
in art and beauty and
Yes, absolutely. That's a big part. We are creative in a way no other creature in existence is. As far as I know, the angels aren't creative at all. But human beings, there's just that we have this innate capacity to desire to want to create. That means like we're like little gods, you know. That's what it means to be in the image. We're little miniaturized partial forms, and that's our creativity is part of that. Absolutely. So it's important to know this. Man is on the one hand a nothing, and on the one hand, in the image of God. And man's purpose is tied to what he is. Our destiny is to realize the image of God within us, and thereby united to the Trinity in love. So once you understand this about yourself, that you are made in the image of the Trinity, and this is your destiny, then you know how you ought to live. You know what direction your life should be taking. You know what it will take to be fulfilled, to achieve your purpose. Man is created to be in communion with other men. I'm using man in the old-fashioned sense, not like males. I'm saying men, human being. Man is created to be in communion with other men, as they also bear the image of the Trinity, and that means all human beings, not just some, because the Father loves the Son and the Spirit, and the Spirit loves the Son and the Father. It's not the Father just loves the Son, but not the Spirit. Likewise, you have to love all human beings that bear the image of the Trinity, just like the Trinity, perfect love for all 3 members. Of the Trinity, we have to cultivate perfect love for all human beings, regardless of, whether it's easy or not. So this helps define our destiny. Once you know what you are and where you come from, you know what you're meant to do. And man must love the world as well, secondarily, as a gift. The primary thing you have to love is God, and then human beings as a sort of an outflowing of that. And then secondarily, you have to love the world, but only insofar as the world is a gift from God, any means of communion with God. Like again, everything you ever experience in your life is a gift because you did not choose to be born. Everything, the whole of reality is a gift to you in a certain sense, personally, and you have to relate to it in that way. Yeah.
The conundrum that we face is we're trying to describe the indescribable in the vocabulary we've created, and it never really works to its fullest potential. We speak of being in the image of God. Now, man is in the image of God. Oh, so is woman, And then, but how can you imagine someone who is God as a man and God as a woman? I mean, either you're a man or you're a woman.
So actually, that's an interesting idea. Are we at our core gendered beings? Are there male and female souls? Certainly, some of the fathers would say no. So Saint Joseph Hesychast would say no. Our sex differences, the difference between men and women, is only part of this world, this creation. In heaven, we're going to be not entirely sexless, I want to say, but certainly there's going to be maybe more androgynous in the next life. So Saint Joseph Hesychast definitely said that our sex, the difference between men and women, is only part of this world, and then the next one, things are going to be different. In what way is it going to be different? I don't know. I mean, I still very deeply rooted in my sense of myself as male, but so that's why I think our maleness and our femaleness is not part of the image of God, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So I don't think that I think it's just part of our animal nature.
We use those words to. God said, and then he did, and we have to conceptualize God either as a he or a she, and yet at the same time we know that every human creature is in the image of God, and
Right.
so what we just said before is inadequate.
Right, and
Yeah.
and in some ways, certain readings of the Book of Genesis, you can see in the male and female, He created them in the image of God. He created them. So in some ways, you might be able to read that as the image of God actually is the coming together of male and female. You don't have a complete image of God until a man and woman are together. It's one way of reading it. It's one way of understanding it. I thought it's really there's something really nice about that actually.
Yeah.
That would kind of make sense with marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly, because
One flesh.
marriage is extremely important in the Bible, in Christianity, in a way that it's not important in other religions and worldviews. Obviously, the book, one thing that's a little cliche, but it's true, is to say that the Bible begins and ends with a marriage. Adam and Eve were always understood as a marriage. That's obviously they were sexual partners; they weren't brother and sister. So the beginning, Genesis, is a marriage, and then the end, Revelation, is actually a marriage of the Lamb, Christ and his bride, the church, coming together. So the Bible begins with a marriage and it ends with a marriage. The union of heaven and earth, that's a marriage. It's a coming together of distinct, separate things, of opposites. So, and Christianity has always been all about marriage and monogamy in specific. There's a lot of a rabbit hole we could go down, but it's really really interesting and important stuff. Okay, so man's being made in the image of Trinity is key to how we are meant to live and be fulfilled. I really think, like, this is what I try to keep underscoring, is that when you understand this, or at least when you have some understanding of this, you kind of unlocks the rest of reality. Everything sort of makes sense. You can see things in this light and realize, okay, everything in the world around you makes sense once you understand that the world was created by the Trinity. We're in the image of the Trinity, and that's what we're meant to get back to. And that's why, by the way, we're so sensitive about tidbits of doctrine. Orthodox say the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Catholics says the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Who cares, right? It's just a small difference. It's just a minor thing. If we are in the image of God, if our destiny and purpose is defined by our being made in the image of God, you actually have to be extremely precise about what you mean when you say God. This is not, some people have the impression, on one level it seems justified to say that, Christians are just obsessed with minutia and stupid little squabbles. And sometimes Christians are obsessed with minutia and stupid little squabbles. But doctrines about the nature and being of God are extremely important if we're made in the image of God. If we weren't made in the image of God, maybe you could argue that it wasn't as important. But if how we live and how we do everything depends on who God is and how God exists, then we really have to be right about it, and we really can't admit any kind of error with regards to it. It's like, how doctors have to be extremely accurate about how the human body works and what goes on inside. You can't admit little silliness or wishful thinking, because then you're going to botch how you treat a patient. You need to be right about things. Yes. The devil's in the details. That's right. The devil's in the details. And so I can't tell you exactly why things will go wrong if you just change the definition of the Trinity a small amount, but I can tell you that things will go wrong, and that will have sort of a cascade effect through the rest of your doctrine.
Maybe the self-evident separation and differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism are a profound example of that, right?
Exactly. And a lot of much smarter and holier individuals than myself have written whole books about how the little doctrinal differences lead to XYZ big difference between us and the Catholics, or us and the Oriental Orthodox, or so on and so forth. So there's the trickle-down effect of doctrine. That's why it matters. It's not...
A number of years ago, I read the story of a guy who was a missionary in Indonesia. Indonesia is primarily Islamic country, and there's some other religions in there. But he, when he had been in seminary, he thought what a waste of time it was to be spending all his time in this abstract Greek philosophy and all these heresies, and and then when he got to Indonesia and started talking with Muslims, all those issues came right back. They're at the core.
In extremely practical ways, yeah.
Because in our world, they're not, because, 2,000 years ago, we accepted that the Docetists were wrong, and then that ended the conversation. Nobody thinks about it. But in an Islamic country where they never got into it, those questions still percolate in the minds of everyday people.
And it affects how they live
Yeah,
and think and
yeah.
behave. Yeah. It's really interesting. I'm going through the Extra Legitarian right now, which is the confession manual of the Orthodox Church, in hopes that, one day, maybe soon, I'll be granted the blessing to hear confessions. And the first thing you're supposed to question a penitent person is, according to this manual, it's not the only manual in existence, but it's the main one in this series, is you have to, do you believe in the doctrines of the Orthodox Church? And then you have to, if they're having trouble, you have to explain to them the Trinity and the two natures of Christ. The first thing, before you get to any of their sins, before you get to, are you cheating on your wife? Have you stolen anything? You have to straighten out the Trinity and the two natures of Christ. I thought that was so fascinating. So fascinating. Okay. Well, we talked about creation today. Let's get to our packets, right? Does everyone have a packet? So, first quote we have is from St. Athanasius the Great. Grudging existence to none, therefore, he, God, made all things out of nothing through his own word, out of nothing being the key thing, through his own word, our Lord Jesus Christ, and of all these, his earthly creatures, he reserved especial mercy for the race of men. So Jesus Christ is called the Son of God. He's also called the Word of God. And when we hear in Genesis, you say, where's Jesus? Where's the Trinity in Genesis chapter 1? Well, it's first we see in verse 3 that the Holy Spirit descends on the waters and hovers over them. And then every time God speaks, let there be light. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. That act of speaking, that word, is Jesus himself in a mysterious way. So that's what we mean. Upon them, therefore, upon men who as animals were essentially impermanent, he bestowed a grace which other creatures lacked, namely the impress of his own image, a share in the reasonable being of the very word himself. So when he says reasonable being, I think he's talking about rational thought, abstract thought. So that reflecting him in themselves, becoming reasonable and expressing the mind of God, even as he does, though in limited degree, they might continue forever in the blessed and only true life of the saints in paradise. So again, we're created, the only reason to create creatures for paradise, for heaven, is that they could think about it, a relationship with someone who can understand the relationship is much deeper than a relationship with an animal or an inanimate object. A truly fulfilling, wonderful relationship comes with another rational creature. So that's St. Athanasius the Great on the Incarnation. And notice, it acknowledges the truth about human beings. I mean, I think that's very real. Human beings are a mix of animal and spiritual. Like once you know that, everything you understand. I don't know, just your own behavior. You understand the behavior of people around you. You understand why there's a conflict in you. That I really would like to have that piece of cake very badly, but I also know it's good. That's actually a battle between the flesh and the spirit. That's a battle between the animal side of me and the spiritual side of me. The part that knows what's right and the part that just desires, the part that consumes. And so, again, use these sort of doctrines as a lens for understanding your day-to-day behavior. Understand the people around you. The human beings are all in a war between flesh and spirit. Because they're mixed, and how do we win the war? We win the war when the animal side is completely subject to the spiritual side. We don't get rid of our animal nature, like we don't try to shed our physicality and just live as disembodied souls, but rather the soul has to rule the body completely. And so a more fulfilled person is someone who has more control over themselves. And that's why, part of our spiritual practice is fasting. You think, well, what and how much you eat have to do with spirituality? It's just about being a good person. No, it's about conquering yourself, and you'll never be able to be a fully good person if there's part of you that's not under control, because those impulses will win out over your desire to love your neighbor. Okay. Here's now Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. In this manner, then, it is demonstrated that there is one God, the Father, uncreated, invisible, creator of all things, above whom there is no other God, and after whom there is no other God. God is rational, and remember, rational means abstract thought, and logic and things like that, and language. And therefore made his creation by his word. He is also spirit, so he fashioned all things by his spirit. As the prophet puts it, by the word of the Lord the heavens were established, and by the power of them, and all the power of them by his spirit. The word establishes and gives body and substance, the spirit gives order and form to the various powers. Gosh, you could go really deep rabbit holes like this, but this has to do with sort of an Aristotelian way of looking at the world, which I think is still valid and true. But if you understand, the human beings are human bodies and brains and all that. On one level, they're two things. their body, this is physical stuff. Like I'm a certain amount of carbon, I'm a certain amount of H2O. The physical stuff. But if you just, if someone just handed you 200 pounds of carbon and H2O and whatever, it wouldn't be Father Theodore. There's the substance, the physical stuff, and then there's the form, the arrangement. And the form is the spirit, is the soul in the old-fashioned term. The way things are harmoniously interrelated, that's the soul. It's not necessarily some kind of fluffy ectoplasm or something. It's the arrangement, it's the harmonious interweaving of things. So human beings are body and soul in that respect. Yes?
Is that kind of in a sense of like, at least I don't even know if this makes sense, but like God is almost like, or the Father is almost like the mind, or like our mind is almost our model after the Father.
Yeah.
And then like how we speak is after the Son, and then like our hands and what we do is like the Spirit.
Knocked it out of the park, except the last part, which is that the Father is the mind, the Son is the Word, and the Spirit is the breath. The Spirit is the Spirit is the physical sound waves that carry the Word. So that's the fathers have always said that's so. Just like there are a lot of images of the Trinity in reality. So like the Son, the ball of gas is the Father, the rays are the Son, and the energy, the heat is the Spirit. Likewise, the mind is the mind which thinks the things up is the Father. The word that gets expressed is the Son, and the actual physical manifestation of the word and the sound waves carried over the air is the Spirit. So these are all images. Yeah. Yes.
This is kind of going into the weeds with it, but could you say
I love the weeds. Let's spend all day in the weeds.
the radiative heat from the sun doesn't proceed from the photons that we can observe. It's like the spirit doesn't proceed from the sun; it proceeds from the Father. So the sun is the source of radiation, but the photons are not.
This is too far in the weeds because I don't want to comment. Sorry, I know. Because the thing is, if I say yes or no, I might be signing myself up for a heresy. The fathers who talked about the sun thing did not know about photons. So I don't want to say anything that'll get me in trouble. So it's very very interesting question. It's an extremely interesting question. I know I completely contradicted myself. Okay, and then from St. Gregory Palamas. Knowing God in truth to the extent that this is possible is not only incomparably better than Hellenic philosophy. Hellenic is Greek, and the word for Greek in Greece is Elina. So Greek was like a pejorative word among early Christians. Like a Greek meant like a pagan. So anyway, so knowing God in truth to the extent that this is possible is not only incomparably better than Hellenic philosophy, but also knowing what place man has before God alone of itself surpasses all their wisdom. Because, the Greeks, for all their wisdom, did not understand that man is in the image of likeness of God. They either considered him as a deity or as an animal, and they didn't understand that man is an animal, but he's an animal elevated by the deity of God. They didn't get that. Anyway, for of all earthly and heavenly things, man alone was created in the image of his Maker, so that he might look to him and love him, and that he might be an initiate and worshipper of God alone, and might preserve his proper beauty by faith in him and inclination and disposition towards him, and that he might know that all other things which this heaven and earth bear are inferior to himself and completely devoid of intelligence. Self-explanatory, but that is an important part of what it means to be a human. The Greek word for human is anthropos. It's where we get the word anthropology, not the store, but like the subject of like the study of human beings. Thank you, someone laughed. Anthropos. The fathers they loved their etymologies, and modern linguists don't necessarily agree with all their etymologies, but I do think they reveal something. They said anthropos. What is a human being? Anthropos is three words. They said it came from three words in Greek. Ano trepi prosopo. That who turns his face up. A man is the only creature in physical creation that can contemplate the divine, can contemplate that was what's beyond himself. If you don't, if you doubt me, go home and ask your dog who created you. He doesn't care. He doesn't think about it at all. Now, animals react to the presence of God. Animals react to the presence of holiness. Like I've heard all sorts of stories about saints and holy monks and holy nuns, and the animals instinctively respond to their presence. Like Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who would feed a bear from his hand. But even in the modern day, there's this Serbian monk you can see on the internet who's like got a wolf or something that he is friends with, or so animals react to the presence of God, but it's not because they understand who God is. It's just because there's instinct. They're pure instinct. I'm saying it's on Google image search.
I
Serbian-
mean,
Yeah.
I don't doubt somebody said it. My own experience.
No, I'm saying image search. Like you see it. Like it is. I'm not. It's not written down. It is like there's pictures of them hanging out together.
Because before we eat,
Yeah.
we always pray before the icon corner.
Yeah.
And the dog just comes through and she just munches away.
Yeah.
No reaction.
Yeah. I think it depends on the person's sanctity. It's not just all
maybe it's us,
animals
yeah.
react. I'm not saying all animals react to all prayers every time. That's certainly not true. Anyway, okay. Special study: creation and evolution. Although her roots lay in Second Temple Judaism, Christ is the fulfillment of the law and prophets. Christianity was born into a world dominated by Hellenistic thought, Greek thought. From the outset, the apostles and their successors had to figure out how to express the eternal truths revealed to us in Christ in a way that was intelligible to the world around them, while at the same time ensuring that the dominant pagan culture did not distort the message of the gospel and the authenticity of the church's life in Christ. Each successive generation, this is important to understand, because a lot of people looking back on the church fathers, the early years of Christianity, say, oh, look, they used a lot of the language of Plato, they used the language of Aristotle. That means they took all their ideas from Plato and Aristotle. And that's not correct. If Christ hadn't come in the past and he came today, we would use all of the language of existential thought to describe what we were seeing. We would use scientific words to describe what we're seeing. It's not because we're stealing from existentialism, we're stealing from science, or we're stealing from postmodernism or whatever philosophy. It's just this is the conceptual language available to them to express what they saw and heard and experienced. So it's important to know that. Each successive generation presented new opportunities and new challenges for the Christians who were struggling to be in the world, but not of it. In the ancient church, the primary challenges were presented by the dominant strains of Greek philosophy, especially Platonism and the various forms of materialism. Since the 17th century, the church has faced the challenge of a world increasingly dominated by the claims of modern science. Nowhere is the challenge more keenly perceived than in regard to the question of human origins. Unfortunately, debates concerning the various theories of human evolution that have taken place almost exclusively within the context of Western European Christianity, that is, non-Orthodox Christianity, and have almost always assumed the scientific project begun in the 1600s to be determinative. This has resulted in two opposing viewpoints. On the one hand, those who reject any theory of evolution outright on the basis of a literalistic reading of the Bible. In the 20th century, this led to mostly Protestant Christians employing science as a means to disprove Darwin and prove the biblical account of creation. On the other hand, there are those who accept some form of evolutionary explanation for human origins, but who nonetheless try and reconcile this view with the idea of a creator. On this view, evolutionary theory is not wrong, but incomplete. God indeed created the world and mankind, but he uses evolutionary processes to do it. The problem is that both scientific creationism and theistic evolution are predicated on the same erroneous assumption, namely that modern empirical science is the final arbiter of truth. For the first group, science can prove that God created the earth in 6 days a few thousand years ago, as well as the veracity of the biblical accounts of the flood, etc. For the second group, it is not just science as a method, but the current scientific consensus is that is definitive. That being the case, they're forced to interpret the Bible in light of that consensus. So there's a lot to be said on this subject, and I did a whole video about this before on YouTube, so I instead of repeating everything here, I'd go and watch that, because this is something that, if you're interested in science and human origins, you really ought to get in the weeds. And that video will get you into the weeds, and we can talk more, and I can recommend some books and stuff if you want to get more in the weeds than that. But it's a complex thing, and it's complicated in my experience by the fact that the vast majority of people don't know much about science, and they don't know much about religion. So when you want to talk about science and religion, they're just they think they know things, but they know almost nothing. So you really have to do a lot of groundwork to even have a meaningful and interesting conversation about science and religion. So let me just leave it at that for right now. Father Seraphim Rose wrote that evolutionary theory is a rival thought pattern to orthodoxy, not just another idea. In other words, Darwinian evolution, or any other materialistic theory of the origin of the world, is fundamentally incompatible with the Orthodox faith and must be rejected as false and dangerous to our spiritual health. Does this mean, however, that we must reject science in favor of a literalistic reading of the book of Genesis? Again, the fault lies in the way the question is formulated. We must understand that what modern science is in order to understand its limits. Only then will we be able to understand that the study of ultimate origins lies well beyond the ken of science. Pretensions otherwise are merely borrowed finery, a metaphysical claim asserted by those who deny in principle the existence of anything beyond the material order. At the same time, we will also understand that the ultimate origins is precisely what is revealed in the book of Genesis, which means beginning or origins. So in the broad strokes, I think this is fundamentally correct, which is that Genesis tells us the truth about the world. What is the truth about the world? The truth about the world is that God created it from nothing, that man, on the one hand, is a created being, contingent and dependent, on the other hand, in the image of God. These are the most important truths Genesis has to tell us. At the same time, there are issues with going all in on the evolutionary Darwinian account. Like, if you accept the scientific origin story as it's displayed in the Natural History Museum in DC or something, then you're going to run into problems with reconciling that with Christianity. Now, of course, the world doesn't have to make sense. Some things can exist as contradictions. Our knowledge is limited, so that's fine. But contradictions do exist. There are problems, and so again, it really helps to get more into the weeds, and we don't have time for that. Modern empirical science is based entirely on the assumption of philosophical materialism. That is, the idea that reality consists exclusively of physical matter, though today we might want to say matter and energy. All of which is to say that modern science assumes a world devoid of God or any spiritual reality. The question now becomes, is this assumption merely a working assumption, or does it stand as an absolute metaphysical doctrine? The answer to this question depends entirely on which scientist one is talking about at the time. That's actually a really important point. Some people really will come out and say that science has proved that the world can exist apart from God, apart from anything outside of material reality. And really, in general, that's not true. It's actually the opposite. They assumed that there is nothing outside the material reality, then tried to construct the model that has the world creating and organizing itself apart from an immaterial reality. So it's actually an assumption, not a deduction. But if materialism is merely a working assumption, then it functions as a sort of bracketing mechanism. The scientist will only deal with the phenomena that fall within the brackets of material reality. So if you're trying to see how two chemicals interact with each other in a test tube, then it's important to not really expect that any angels are going to be going down and messing with them or affecting the solution. This is called methodological naturalism. When you're doing a scientific experiment, you should assume that the only things are in there, the only forces interacting are material forces, that nothing spiritual or supernatural is going on. That you can't do science without that assumption. That's very true. But obviously, any explanatory theories that are devised will be limited by the brackets as well. Understood in this way, there's no bar whatsoever to an Orthodox Christian pursuing a career in the natural sciences. A Christian chemist will seek to explain some chemical reaction entirely in terms of known or inferred chemical processes. He will not consider the possible influence of pixies or voodoo because such things fall outside the brackets. This clearly limits the sort of things the empirical scientist can know, can study, and the kinds of questions he can ask. The scientist can ask how a reaction came about, but not why. Or in the language of Aristotle, the scientist is restricted to the material and efficient causes, but cannot look at final causes. On the other hand, if materialism is taken to be a fundamental description of reality, then God is excluded as a matter of principle. There's no why to it at all. The world just is, and there's no more to be said about it than that. This view, self-contradictory as it is fundamentally opposed to the Orthodox faith. There can be no question that since at least the last half of the 19th century, materialism has functioned as a metaphysical principle. As such, and as a cultural phenomenon, science functions in a way that is utterly antithetical to Orthodox Christianity. We can go beyond what Father Seraphim said. Not just evolutionary theory, but today's science itself as a social and cultural force is a rival thought pattern to orthodoxy. So again, what I always say is, some people like to say science and religion contradict each other. They're in conflict. Some people like to say science is perfectly compatible with religion, and the truth is, it's a mix. It depends on what you mean by science. It depends what you mean by religion. It depends what specific issue you're talking about. The example I always use: Orthodoxy has no problem with the ideal gas law, PV equals nRT. We don't have much to say about how the interactions between two chemicals are going to produce the outcome of a third chemical. It really has not. It doesn't contradict our faith in any way. If you want to say that everything came about through unguided processes unintentionally, Well, yeah, then there is problems because we don't believe we are the result of random, disinterested process. We do believe we were created by a mind that had intentional purposes for us. So it really depends. What do you mean by science? What issue are you talking? What are you talking about? Chemicals? Are you talking about human origins? Are you talking about, how dogs and foxes and when you talk about evolution, it's the same thing. Are you talking about how dogs and foxes and wolves are all from the same ancestor? They obviously were. There is a degree of evolution that happened. Then, are you saying that microbes can become human beings? Well, there's more problems there. Yes.
Can you tell me if this thought process is wrong? So, like when God created Adam, He created, a man.
Yeah.
He created him as a fetus, a baby, a toddler,
Yeah.
adolescence. He created a fully grown man. So, like, since He kind of like skipped all those stages,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it wrong to think that when God created the earth, that maybe He created it in a state where same thing, like it was no plants, animals, whatever, but it took a while to get to that. But God just created it like that, just like how He skipped all those stages.
Right.
With Adam. Is that wrong to think, or?
No, it's certainly possible, and people have proposed that. Like when Jesus performed the miracle of turning water into wine, Cana at Galilee, he skipped the whole process of pressing down the grapes and letting them sit and ferment for a while. He just had fully finished product wine. But there actually was a set of stages where grapes would naturally turn into wine if he allowed them to. So the miracle wasn't that wine came from water, but it's that he skipped a bunch of steps. So maybe that's how God created the world. There actually were certain natural processes by which the world would come together, but God created it supernaturally, instantaneously. Or you can have certain, like there are Orthodox Christians who believe in the entire evolutionary story as it's presented, like in the Natural History Museum or what have you. That's fine. They're still legitimately Orthodox Christians. There are contradictions there, but there are contradictions in every view of things you choose to take. You're always going to be swallowing some level of contradictions because, again, our view of reality is finite. So I don't begrudge that. But that is one possible option among multiple possible options for viewing how the world happened. Yes.
One way of viewing the creation stories in Genesis is to compare it to other creation stories
Right.
that are contemporaneous to it. And one of the things that makes the Genesis stories unique is not only are we told what happened and why the situation is the way it is now, we're also told that the creation is intentional and it is for the benefit of us, the reader. And that's so different than the Babylonian stories. They tell you why the world is the way it is.
Right.
But there's no particular, there's nothing particularly good about that fact. Well, that's just how it is,
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, and this is how you have to understand that what Genesis tells us in contradiction of atheism or other views of the world. Like for instance, a lot of ancient Near Eastern stories had, in the beginning, there were a bunch of gods, and then the gods battled each other. There was a war in heaven of some kind, and then the earth and human beings were created kind of as a result of that fighting. No one actually created the world intentionally, but it just happened to be what happens when gods fight is worlds get created or something.
The gods didn't want to work,
right?
And so they decided to make little creatures to do the work for them.
Right. That's a different reading of history. And if you believe human beings are a cosmic accident, you're going to live one way. If human beings were built as slaves to the gods, you're going to live in a different way. If you believe human beings were in the image of likeness of God, you're going to live in a third way. What you believe about human origins matters. And again, many, I don't know, I've never taken a survey. Orthodox Christians do believe we descended from apes. That's fine. You can believe that and be an Orthodox Christian. However, you cannot believe we are mere apes. We are apes that at some point in the process got the image and likeness of God imprinted on us. However, God chose to do that with whatever. But we are not mere animals among animals. We are something distinct and different. So again, that's what the meaning you have to extract from the book of Genesis. As Orthodox Christians, we are called to acquire the mind of Christ, which is another way of saying the mind of the church. We do this by reading the scriptures and the writings of the church fathers, by attending services and praying the prayers of the church, and by living in obedience to Christ's commandments. By doing this, we will gradually begin to see the world afresh. A world that once was opaque to spiritual reality becomes transparent. We begin to see reality as it really is, not just a succession of transient material phenomena. So this is what I was alluding to before, is however whatever material processes brought things to being what they are, understand that there was intention, there was mind behind it, there was God's purposes, and that way all of reality can reveal things about God to us. This means that the world revealed to us in the church, above all in the scriptures and in liturgy, is far more complex and profound than the one revealed by empirical science. This does not mean that science properly understood is bad, but merely of limited value. That's the key. As such, we must resist the temptation to reduce God's revelation to us in the level of what we might otherwise expect from science or secular history. The book of Genesis is not an allegory. It really, literally, if you will, is about the creation of the world and the origin of mankind. That does not mean, however, that the account in Genesis is designed to give us the same sort of information we might expect from a science text. To rummage through the scriptures looking for scientific facts and explanations is to miss the point entirely. This is why I said that scientific creationists make the same fundamental mistake as the theistic evolutionists do. The proof of orthodoxy is not to be found in the fossil record or in the ruins of a boat on top of Mount Ararat, but in the lives of the saints, that is, in the lives of those who have acquired the mind of Christ and for whom the world has become transparent to God's reality. That is the estate to which we have been called, this to become living proof of God's reality within our own times. This is largely true. I will disagree with Dr. Carlton a little bit on this. It actually matters. Like, the fossil record is relevant to what you believe about Earth history. Why is there this succession of origins? What are dinosaurs? Where in the world do they fit in? I do have answers to that in my other video. But you can't just say, oh, it doesn't matter. There's no problem there. It does. Anyway, yes.
Well, like an Orthodox Christian believing that humans originated from apes,
Yeah.
wouldn't that presuppose that the day timeline would be something different than a day? Like a day
Yes.
would be
Yes.
like
That would
10,000
Day
years,
would be
20,000.
millions or billions of years. Yeah. So you have to take some liberties with the text. That's why I said there are issues with it. But the biggest issue is that it would have death existing before the fall of human beings. Because we believe the historical belief has been that death was not part of this world until Adam and Eve chose to sin. But if you look at the mainstream natural history, they say, oh, millions and billions of years things died before Adam and Eve came on the scene. How does that work? Well, some people have come up with schemes. Maybe the fall worked backward in time, or maybe the fall preceded all of time. Maybe it did. I don't know. But
Still kind of problematic.
it is problematic. No matter what, you're going to end up swallowing some problematic things. If you don't believe in the mainstream view of evolution, which I don't, you do have to explain why are there no human beings way deep down in the fossil record? Why does it start with stromatolites, then move through shallow marine organisms? I believe there are answers to that, but you do have to wrestle with it. Yeah.
So it kind of goes along with that question, but it was more so answered. If like an Orthodox Christian believes that we evolved from like apes or primates,
Yeah.
could someone say that Adam and Eve had an appearance of looking more primitive than we do now?
Yes, some people do say that. They looked more like
Neanderthals?
Homo erectus, Neanderthals, these skeletons that we find in the ground. Some people do say that. Yeah. Yes.
Even if someone does devolve human nature to just we are the highest evolution of primates, you still have to keep everything in order. You still have to rob from Christianity that we have morality, because if you believe that we're just a higher evolved state, there's no reason that I shouldn't do everything just to benefit myself.
Oh yeah.
Like you can't explain morality without God.
I think I said before that no matter what view of evolution, human origins you take in Christianity, you're swallowing some contradictions. I believe to be an atheist, you're actually swallowing worse contradictions. I believe the atheist has no basis to explain morality. The atheist actually has no basis on which to explain rational thought. I think you really have to wonder if our cognitive abilities evolved sometime about 2 million years ago on the African savanna in order to survive in that environment. Why can we build rockets that take us to the moon? That seems way, way beyond what is necessary for survival value of some primates in Africa 2 million years ago. How come we can know deep truths about the world? There's this Christian philosopher named Alvin Plantinga who wrote a really great book, a really great argument called The Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism. Is you can't explain, and C.S. Lewis actually has a book that goes through pretty much the same argument called Miracles. You can't explain the whole depth and breadth of our cognitive abilities through Darwinian evolution. Darwinian evolution gives us tools to survive. They don't give us. There's no reason to think Darwinian evolution would give us any tools to perceive truth, especially not deep truths, especially not mathematically and logically derived truths. It doesn't make any sense. Yes.
I'm just gonna like. I've always thought, as being a Christian, whether like evolution is real or not, that it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it matters to a certain extent, but it doesn't really change what happened 2,000 years ago. It doesn't change
Right.
the validity of Jesus Christ and His church. There's just like, I feel like a lot of Christians kind of get hung up
Right.
on evolution, and you know, you gotta, as a Christian, you gotta be all right with not knowing everything and
Right.
having a fundamental. You gotta be,
Yeah,
like, if we are descendants of the higher level of primate, or if we're not, if the Genesis story is 1,000% true, it does. We're still here. Jesus is still God. And the
Yeah.
Orthodox Church is still His church. And I just like it's you know, we should talk about it, but I feel like so many people just get way too hung up on that.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and that is the tack I always used to take and stuff, because we believe in what we believe in, not just because evolution is an insufficient explanation, but for positive reasons. We believe it because Jesus really did rise from the dead. We believe it because we've seen miracles. We believe it because we've seen saints. So again, if someone presented me with incontrovertible evidence that human beings descended from apes, some people say that evidence already exists. I wouldn't lose sleep over it. You know what I mean? Because I believe in the existence of God, for not just because it's by process of elimination, but because I have positive reasons to believe in God. I have positive reasons to believe in miracles and so on.
the same kind of like logical fallacy is saying that like because the church fathers described their philosophical foundation using Hellenic process, that means that they stole it from Greek traditions.
Yeah, I think there's something similar going on there. Yeah. Yes.
I think basically, truth does not have to correct itself. But evolution has never actually proven itself because you'd have to prove the in-between steps, and they've never proven the missing link.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So that's a whole can of worms, because it's obvious that it is a certain degree of evolution in the past has definitely been proven. We definitely have skeletons of human beings like Homo erectus and Homo neanderthal that seem like they were more primitive humans. I believe they're fully children of Adam and Eve and formed in the image of God. But like some level of evolution did happen. The question is how much. Could human beings came from other types of human beings? That's for sure. Did they come from other types? Apes? I don't know. But so.
What Tucker was saying earlier was, were things just made in their adult form?
Right.
That evolution calls that I lost the word now. It calls it punctuated evolution.
The idea of punctuated equilibrium. So that's a different theory. Yeah. I already sense we're drifting towards the weeds right now, so I'll apologize. But these are very good things to talk about. It's very important things to talk about. Okay, questions for reflection. From what did God create the world?
Nothing.
Nothing. You nailed it. Did God have to create the world? No. He freely chose. Did God have to create Carlos? No. In fact, many people were telling him not to. But everything is pure gift. Everything is pure free gift of God's self. What separates man from the rest of creation?
We talked about that earlier.
The image of God. Yeah, sum it up in one tight phrase, the image of God. It's a cocktail of different things, but sum it up in one phrase, the image of God. In what way is man created in the image of God? Okay, now you can. Free will, morality, rational thoughts, dominion over creation, creativity.
Would appearance be one too?
Maybe. We talked about that a little bit. The thing is we don't know. But maybe.
Both spirit and flesh.
Yeah. In what way does man's relationship with God reflect the Son's eternal relationship with the Father? Oh, geez, I don't think I taught you guys that.
They're both intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're We're called to become sons of God, basically. Jesus says in the Gospel of John that whoever believed in him, he gave power to become sons of God. So in a certain sense, we're supposed to have the same relationship to the Father that Jesus has. That's kind of wild when you consider like all the implications of that. But that's what deification is.
Mhm.
And that's what some people experience in the Orthodox Church today.
God became man
So that man might become God. Yeah.
I mean,
Can man be defined as a rugged individual? No. Yeah, sorry. These are more specific things he talked about in the book, and I just sort of abstracted a lot from the book. So no, basically, we live in communion with other people. You really can't go and strike it out on your own unless you just want nothing at all. As much as you can, build out of sticks in the woods. But even then, you were raised by your mother. You were fed and educated to a certain degree. You literally can't just leave a child in the woods. Sometimes animals will raise them. That has happened. And people are totally feral when that happens. I read some disturbing stories from like India, but yeah.
Sorry, does that mean like you can't just go off in your, or like?
I mean, it's physically impossible. You exist. Everything you have, like even if Carlos wanted to abandon society right now and just live in the woods by himself.
What about like Saint Mary of Egypt that like went off into the desert?
Right.
But
she
still relied on God.
She relied on God and she learned the scriptures from God. But I'm saying like everything that happened to her before then, she learned to speak. She was she was raised by her parents. People supported her and fed her at different times. Like we live these interconnected lives. We just take it for granted. But we're except when you get to the point of going out in the distance, you spent every moment before you went out in the wilderness, you were dependent on other people. So in aggregate, and she still had to receive communion from Saint Zosimas. So, how is man's relationship with his fellow men related to his creation in the image of God?
We're all in the image of God.
Right, which
We
means
have to see every one of us as being in the
right. We have to just like the Father. It's not an option for him. He can't just love the Son and not the Spirit. The Father loves the Son and the Spirit. The Son loves the Father and the Spirit. The Spirit loves the Father and the Son. We have to love all human beings. We're all in the image of the Trinity. What is the biblical basis for the equality of the human race?
we're all descendants.
Right. We're all descendants of Adam and Eve. We're all part of one family. We're not separate species. That sounds, again, well, duh, Father Theo. But actually, there were these theories, in the early Enlightenment called polygenism. You go around. The Europeans were for the first time sailing to different continents. They said, oh, these Africans look so wildly different. They must have come from a different origin than we did. These Chinese are so different. They must have come from a different origin. And the Christian response was always, no, we're one species. We're one because we're descendants of Adam. Yes?
I was just gonna say, like that's kind of like what we talked about today with the gospel reading of the Good Samaritan, how like Jews would view Samaritans
Yeah.
as lesser,
Yeah.
but Jesus is pointing out that Samaritan did more than these two huge priestly figures who just walked
on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
Didn't even walk on the same side. Couldn't even be bothered to look down and go,
Right.
gosh, that's shameful.
Right.
Couldn't even be
Yeah.
bothered. But this other man put him on his animal, put him on his horse, his camel, or whatever beast he had at the time, and took him to an inn and bandaged his wounds. And
It's hard to imagine how big it was, but one of the biggest issues you read about in the New Testament was opening up the people of God to non-Jews.
Yeah.
That was the part that a lot of the Jews hated the most about Jesus' message and why they wanted to kill him sometimes. It was an issue even after Jesus Christ ascended into heaven, where Paul and Peter got in a huge conflict about it because Peter wanted to keep the old law and eat separately from non-Jews. And Paul told him that that's not right. That's not what Jesus came for. It is a huge deal. Human beings are naturally tribal. Human beings are naturally, in a sense, natural. When I say naturally, I mean it comes very easily to us. We are naturally racist in a certain sense. We have to. It's through Christ that we overcome that. We don't notice it as much because we live in the first society in history that we've been educated from childhood that that's not the way things ought to be. But most societies in almost all of history were on the default setting much more racist than any of us are and still are. Yeah. So anyway, How is man's use of the physical world related to his creation in the image of God?
We're creators in dominion.
We're creators, we have dominion, but there's an ethical precept.
We're creators and masters, but at the same time, we're servants.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody in North Carolina, if they had known what was going to happen beforehand, would have ever allowed to continue whatever they were doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't just sit there and wait to get
Pummeled by
away.
the storm, yeah. Yeah. So it's we are on the one hand we have dominion, and on the other hand everything is borrowed. None of it we made ourselves. We can shape what has been given to us, but it is a gift, and so it's something we need to be responsible about. So
Yeah, I
our
was just about to say,
good stewards, exactly. So our patriarch is All Holiness Bartholomew I. There's this picture in the corner over there. He's really into the environment, and it's true. It's a proper understanding. We need to live in harmony with the environment. We are the masters of it, but you can be a good master or a bad master. You can be a good father where you take care of your children, raise them up, or you can be a tyrant and an abuser. That's our relationship with creation. We can have a healthy relationship or an unhealthy relationship. We're going to be in authority no matter what. Just like the parent will always have authority over the child in a certain respect. You can use the authority well or use it poorly. Okay.
I remember the story from the Brothers Karamazov, where this guy's got a horse, and the horse is old and running down, and he beats it, and it dies.
Yeah.
And then he's mad at it because it won't get up.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole time, actually, it was really interesting because what the people are shouting, because they're watching him, this man beat his horse to death. And in English, it's translated as, you have no conscience, you have no conscience. But what the people around him are shouting are actually, Kresti na tebie niet. You have no cross on you. It's an old-fashioned Russian way of saying you have no conscience, because they're watching him just abuse this animal terribly. They're saying, you're not wearing a cross, you're not wearing a cross. Whether or not he was wearing a physical cross.
You're the victim of your own stupidity.
Right. Okay. All right, I'll hang out, I'll answer more questions, but that's it for the video. Christ our God, you're the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. You have completed the divine plan of the Father. Fill our hearts with joy and gladness now and ever into the ages of ages. Amen. God bless you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry it ran so long.